you please be kindly seated? Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we commence today's pivotal deliberations, permit me the honor to respectfully acknowledge and accord honor to the distinguished leaders, global figures, policymakers gracing our hall today with their presence. I'll begin by acknowledging the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Senator Kashim Shettima, GCON, ably represented by Dr. Tokwe Fashua, the Special Advisor to the President of Economic Affairs. The National Security Advisor, Madam Nuhu Ribadu. Good morning, sir, and welcome. You know, when I saw you coming to the hall, I was like, okay, we have the NSA here, in the money building. Okay, I think we're safer. Thank you very much, sir, for coming. Of course, our host, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso, the Central Banker of the Year. Another round of applause. And another round of applause for yourselves, the Central Bank staff, where you're building. Make it louder. You deserve it. It's been a rigorous 3 years plus, so you all deserve it. Distinguished guests, welcome to what promises to be an enriching and impactful forum. I am Nancy Naji, a broadcaster. I anchor the foremost Moneyline with Nancy on AIT, and it is my honor to serve as your compere for today's proceedings. Let us begin without further ado. To set the tone for our gathering and welcome you officially, it is my pleasure to invite a co-architect of this forum, Dr. Chukwuka Onyekwena, Executive Director for CC, to deliver his welcome remarks. Please let us welcome him.
Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, distinguished guests, Olayemi, Cardoso, esteemed policymakers, development partners, members of the diplomatic community, colleagues from academia, and the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand on existing protocol elected by Nancy. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 7th Africa Emerging Markets Forum here in Abuja. At the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, we are honored to partner with the Emerging Markets Forum and the Central Bank of Nigeria in convening this important. This forum represents more than another conference on Africa's development challenges. It is a platform for strategic thinking, evidence-based dialogue, and policy engagement at a time when both Africa and the global economy are undergoing some profound transformation. We are particularly proud that this edition of the forum is taking place here in Nigeria and indeed in Africa. Bringing together such a distinguished assembly of global leaders, African leaders, researchers, policymakers, and practitioners is a significant milestone. It reflects a shared recognition that Africa's future must increasingly be shaped by African ideas, African institutions, and African-led policy conversations. We are deeply grateful to the Central Bank of Nigeria under the leadership of Governor Olayemi Cardoso for the huge support in hosting this event and commitment to advancing policy-relevant research and dialogue. I would also like to acknowledge the vision and leadership of Mr. Harinda Kohli and the Emerging Markets Forum for creating a platform that has consistently fostered meaningful dialogue between emerging economies and global institutions. At CC, the forum carries special significance. Our institution was founded by Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, whose lifelong commitment to evidence-based policymaking, economic transformation, and Africa's place in the global economy continues to inspire our work. Her presence in today's program is a powerful reminder of the role of ideas, leadership, and institutions can play in shaping development outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme that unites our discussions over the next 2 weeks will be timely. The global economy is experiencing one of the most consequential periods of transition in recent history. Geopolitical tensions are reshaping trade relationships. Supply chains are reorganized. Technological change, particularly advances in artificial intelligence, is transforming production systems, labor markets, and public policy. Climate change is imposing new economic realities, while tighter global financial conditions continue to challenge developing economies. For Africa, these developments present both risks and opportunities. On one hand, many African economies remain vulnerable to external shocks, commodity price volatility, inflationary pressures, food insecurity, and fluctuations in international capital flows. But on the other hand, the continent possesses significant opportunities arising from demographic dynamism, digital innovation, expanding regional markets, abundant renewable energy resources, and the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So the central question before us is therefore not whether the global economy is changing. It clearly is. The more important question is whether Africa can transform these changes into the foundation for sustainable, inclusive, and resilient growth. So this forum seeks to contribute by answering that question. The program has been carefully designed to address some of the most pressing policy challenges confronting African economies today. Over the next 2 days, the forum will examine 5 interrelated research teams that address some of the most pressing policy challenges, accounting African economies, and offer practical, evidence-based solutions for sustainable and inclusive growth. What unites these studies is their strong policy orientation. As TC, we believe research must go beyond diagnosing problems to informing practical solutions and better policy choices. Collectively, the papers provide actionable aid to help governments, central banks, development partners, and the private sector to strengthen resilience, deepen regional integration, accelerate innovation, and advance inclusive and sustainable development across Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa stands at a critical moment in its development journey. The choices we make in response to global economic change will influence the prosperity and opportunities available to the future generations. Our challenge is not merely to withstand change, but to shape it. Our objective is not merely to build resilience, but to build prosperity. And our ambition should not be limited to adapting to the future, but to help to define it. On behalf of the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, I thank you all for your participation and commitment, and I wish you fruitful deliberations as we look forward to the insights and partnership that will emerge from this program. Thank you very much. It is now my singular honor to welcome the CEO and Chairman of the Emerging Markets Forum, Dr. Harry Neko.
thank you very much for those very nice remarks. Thank you for your introduction and a very good introduction to our forum. And after introduction very nice introduction by our MC, I'll keep my remarks short. And I think I'll start by thanking our host, Governor Cardoso, for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you, Governor. Thank you for coming, giving us a very good time. And I'll be remiss for not thanking your special advisor, Dr. Nikhil. She worked tirelessly in organizing many, many things, the program, but also transforming this conference hall for us in the last 24 hours. So thank you very much. So I think we will have a very rich meeting. So I want to add a few other things. It's not only the largest meeting, but I think very rich meeting to focus on the African continent, which in my terminology, I've said in other meetings, is the ultimate frontier of economic development in the world. And we need to pay attention to the development and challenges of African continent. And I think Dr. Chuka has given us a very good, inspiring statement on what this forum should be focusing on. The program of the meeting in the next 2 days focuses on 6 intertwined issues, ranging from fiscal and monetary issues of interest to not only central banks, but development economists, but also artificial intelligence, which is a very important issue, urban development and jobs, where Goldmynetv written a very inspired packaging study, which is a flagship report, which they'll be presenting tomorrow morning. So these six issues, I think, are very important. They interlink with each other. The papers which are in front of you are available on our website. We didn't want to print them because of many reasons, including environmental issues. So we'll invite you, if not as already done, go to our website, Emerging Markets Forum website, and download those papers if you've not done so already. One other point, and that is that not only these issues are important intellectually, to think of development issues facing all of us, but please use different breaks, coffee breaks, lunches, dinners, to talk to each other, not only about substance before you, but other issues, learn from each other, teach each other, make new friends, and I'll be very happy if during these 2 days you make 1 or 2 new friends and stay with each other, in touch with each other. That's one of the benefits of our forum. And it's your forum, not our forum. So think in those terms that this is not just a school, but this is an opportunity to meet new people and renew old friendships. So that's the message I want to convey to you, that this is not just a meeting in a seminar, but this is to learn from each other, to teach each other. Finally, in various sessions, we have these panels and speakers. And you will be seeing on the dais a total of, by my count, 51 people who will be reading and presenting various papers that I just mentioned. So there's a lot of talent from not only Nigeria, but from all over the world who have spent time thinking about these issues, presenting them, debating them, but we're trying to leave enough time that you people sitting in the hall have an opportunity to talk to them, ask questions, get responses from them. And that is what our forum is trying to do, to engage people with each other. So thank you very much. enjoy the forum, and we'll have an opportunity to mingle with each other and talk to each other. Thank you very much. Governor Muhammad Sani Abdullah come here and give his welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Allow me to please stand on existing protocols which have been very well established by the MC. On behalf of the governor, the management, and staff of the Central Bank of Nigeria, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Abuja for the 7th Emerging Markets Forum. To our speakers, central bank peers, policymakers, and partners from across the continent and around the world, thank you for making the journey. We are genuinely glad to host you. I would also like to extend our appreciation to the Emerging Markets Forum for their consistent drive to convene these critical conversations, and to the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa for partnering with us to bring this event to Abuja. The forum comes at a demanding time for emerging economies. Global trade is shifting, technology is reshaping markets, geopolitical realignments are influencing investment decisions, and climate pressures are adding to the challenges faced by governments and businesses. Emerging economies must manage these pressures while maintaining stability and building the foundations for future growth. For Africa, both the stakes and the opportunities are considerable. We have the world's youngest population, expanded digital economies, and substantial human and natural resources. But these advantages will not translate into prosperity on their own. What matters now is execution of sound policy, disciplined institutions, and the willingness to confront difficult trade-offs. Nigeria's experience over the last 3 years illustrates what difficult but necessary structural reforms can achieve. The foreign exchange market has decisively shifted away from multiple administrative windows and an incoherent managed regime towards a transparent, market-reflective system anchored on price discovery. Verified legacy foreign exchange obligations, estimated at over $7 billion, have been fully verified and settled. Electronic price discovery has been modernized through the electronic foreign exchange matching system. Monetary policy and liquidity management have tightened, and the financial system is being strengthened through higher capital requirements and net open position provision limits. These reforms have come with adjustment costs, but they have reduced long-standing distortions in our markets. And under the previous system, where FX subsidies estimated about 3% of GDP in 2022. Since the reforms began, we have seen a narrowing of the premium between the official and parallel exchange markets, exchange rates, and also a significant growth in our foreign exchange, in our gross external reserves, which have risen to $52.52 billion as of 17 July, providing approximately 11 months of imports for goods and services. Net usable reserves have also recovered from $859 million in Q2 of 2023 to over $43 billion at the end of last month. Inflation has considerably eased and real GDP growth has returned. Non-oil exports have increased by 38.7% year on year, and our average monthly portfolio investments have risen from $0.33 billion in January of 2023 to over $2 billion in January of 2025. Nigeria's experience shows that recovery is possible when difficult reforms are backed by consistent and disciplined policy. It also shows that no country can navigate today's global pressures alone. and that monetary and foreign exchange reforms, important as they are, cannot by themselves address Africa's long-term productivity constraints. That is why this forum is so important. Over the next 2 days, we will examine issues ranging from monetary policy and regional integration to artificial intelligence, urbanization, investment, and inclusive growth. While these subjects are distinct, they are connected by one central question. How can we build resilient and productive African economies that deliver meaningful improvement in the lives of our people? At the Central Bank of Nigeria, we recognize that sound policy benefits from dialogue, evidence, and engagement. Bringing together policymakers, researchers, businesses, and development partners allows different perspectives to be heard and to be tested, allows assumptions to be challenged, and practical lessons to be shared. I hope our discussions will therefore go beyond broad statements of intent. We should examine how reforms can be sequenced, how their costs can be managed, what institutional capacity is required, and how results will be measured. We must also recognize that every country represented here has its own unique economic and institutional circumstances. The objective, therefore, is not to reproduce solutions from elsewhere, but to learn honestly from one another's experience and determine what is relevant to our respective realities. I encourage everyone to participate actively, speak candidly, and keep the discussions focused on practical outcomes. The real value of this forum will be seen not only in the quality of our exchanges, but also in the ideas and areas of cooperation that continue after we leave Abuja. To our international guests, I hope your visit will be both productive and enjoyable, and that you will experience the warmth and hospitality for which Nigeria is known. I wish us all a productive and rewarding forum. Thank you.
For want of time, we're going to highlight some findings around this topic, navigating global shocks, monetary policy challenges for African central banks. And you're going to find details when the paper is uploaded. What we know concerning shocks at the moment is that shocks seem to have come to stay, because while you are dealing with one, another one occurs. So it's no longer about whether shocks will occur or not. The question now is how to deal with it. And so for the past few, years, we have recorded multiple shocks with significant impact on world economies. And for that reason, we have seen that in Africa, these shocks affect all economies, but the impact is uneven. And it's significant in Africa because of the globalization and openness of economies, the high level of integration. And these shocks are determined by some structural factors. And so how to deal with it is important to understand how those shocks transmit. That will give us some understanding of how to respond to these shocks. So we're going to follow this outline, and I have mentioned these shocks. In terms of typology, the major shocks that have recently occurred, talks about the COVID-19 in 2020, the Russia-Ukraine war, which affects supply chain, and particularly, and most recently, the Middle East crisis. So, in a nutshell, this paper wants to analyze the significant transmission mechanism through which shocks affect economies and the response of monetary policy. And then we're going to look at how effective have the monetary policy responses in selected African economies. So in terms of theoretical underpinnings, we look at the model-friendly trilemma as the theory of the impossible trinity, which we all know. And in addition to that, there's even the fourth one, which now makes it a quadrilemma, of course, adding financial stability. These are the theoretical underpinnings for the work. Now, we look at major shocks which are global in nature and are transmitted to local economies. And first and foremost of them is the monetary and financial cycles, particularly in advanced economies like the US Fed. Meaning that when the US, the Fed, adjusts its policy, how does it affect, how does it transmit to economies in Africa? We also look at commodity price shock, which is key because of the commodity dependence nature of African economies. And in this case, we isolate crude oil prices, which is a major shock. And then we look at health and supply chain shocks. Recently, we have seen that health shock is no longer only a medical issue. It carries its own macroeconomic risk because of its impact on economy. Then the geopolitical risk shock, of course, which covers geopolitical tension and fragmentation and what have you. And then we also isolate the pass-through through exchange rate channel, which of course is the channel through which all these shocks transmit. So our paper looks at Nigeria and South Africa. And the reason for doing that is because two of these countries rank among the major economies of the world, and they have contrasting fundamentals with macroeconomic characteristics. For example, in South Africa, what we have in terms of monetary framework is formal inflation targeting. But in Nigeria, we are currently transiting, so you can see the variation. Then in exchange rate, we have just unified our rates about 3 years ago. South Africa has been floating, the rand has been floating for a while. In terms of depth of market, the market in South Africa is deeper than that of Nigeria. And in terms of shock exposure, we are exposed more to oil shocks, oil price shocks, food imports, and currency shock, unlike South Africa, whose major exposure is around global risk. So this talks about methodology. I've already mentioned those shocks for want of time. We engage the global VAR technique to isolate and trace shock transmission from the global level to domestic level. We also engage what we call the local projection model to now trace those shocks along levels of horizon, how they affect the economy. So these are the equations. Let's quickly look at the result. In terms of result, we first of all look at how does inflation respond to US monetary policy, modification or propagation. What we have found here is, this is the case for Nigeria, this is the case, the second chart is the case for South Africa. What we have seen is that when there is a US monetary policy shock, a positive shock for that matter, what we have found out is that there is a fall in inflation initially, so the initial impact is a fall in inflation. But after a while, you see inflation rising very sharply in a few months, and then it gradually declines. Now, in South Africa, what we have seen is that there also is a decline. The first impact is a decline, meaning that that shock affects both economies initially with an impact. But the rate of increase, the quantum and the severity of increase is in South Africa is much more moderate than how sharp it happens in Nigeria, and thereafter it turns negative. What this means is that the inflationary effect of US monetary policy tightening is not persistent in both economies. However, the impact and severity is sharper and higher in Nigeria. So we need to look at underlying structural issues that, determine what this has been in the two economies. Then we look at exchange rates, and don't forget exchange rate is crucial here because all these shocks we have mentioned transmit from the global level to domestic economies through this channel, the channel of exchange rate. What the numbers suggest to us is that in Nigeria, which is the first chart here, the impact record an immediate and larger depreciation in the local currency than what we saw in South Africa. The impact is much smaller initially, so the level of depreciation here is much higher. But there is a quick correction thereafter, and you see the impact stabilizing after a while. And again, what it means here is that we look at the fundamentals in terms of market debt through which this impact transmits. And then you will see that if you have a bigger market, you have a bigger, reserve level, you have a stronger, base and buffers, then they determine how far you'll be able to, respond to those shocks and absorb those shocks in terms of exchange rate. So this looks at the forecast error variance decomposition. And what we have seen here in terms of inflation and contribution to inflation, those components, shows that if you look at Nigeria, the data is showing that onshore account for 71.37%. And this is referring to inflation inertia. So the level of policy credibility and how much the economy and the people are able to, get used to expectation, in terms of policy credibility. This is huge because, again, that has to do with how much the economy and the people and businesses are able to trust your policy over time. In South Africa, onshore accounts for 76.6%. So this is a very key consideration that we need to look at. If you look at policy rates onshore account for 63.67%, while in South Africa, it accounts for 76.07%. If you compare the policy rate and inflation and exchange rate, then it will give us an idea that focusing more on policy to respond to some of these shocks without looking at structural issues that will improve on policy credibility may be a wrong response. So it's important here to consider both not just the policy rate as a response to this shock, but also policy credibility. I'm running out of time, so this is exactly what we have found, but I want to quickly give us what this means. The implication of this findings, number one, is the fact that we should treat monetary surveillance very importantly, meaning that we need to look at how these shocks emerge. Number two, we also need to treat exchange rate as a central factor, not secondary. We need to treat rate policy and complement it with structural reforms as is going on in Nigeria now. And finally, we need to know that monetary policy framework alone is not enough. It depends on how much you are able to, supplement it with reforms. That's the only way to be able to respond positively and adequately to reforms and to shock from the external sector. I want to stop here and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Victor, for your presentation, your very comprehensive presentation. So we will go ahead with the theme. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists. Over the past few years, African economies have faced an unprecedented sequence of external shocks. These have included the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, escalating geopolitical tension, disruption to global supply chain, tighter global financial conditions, and growing uncertainty in commodity markets. Policymakers across the continent have had to operate in an environment of extraordinary complexity. These developments have reinforced an important reality. African economies are more integrated into the global economy than ever before. Decisions in Washington, Frankfurt, Beijing, or in global commodity markets are increasingly transmitted to African economies to exchange rates, capital flows, commodity prices, inflation dynamics, and financial market conditions. The paper informing this session offers particularly important insights by examining the experiences of Nigeria and South Africa. It shows that global shocks do not affect all African economies in the same way. Rather, the extent and persistence of these shocks depend on structural factors as exchange rate arrangement, financial market depth, policy credibility, reserve buffers, and institutional capacity. Perhaps most importantly, the study suggests that domestic monetary policy alone may offer only limited insulation against external disturbances, makers, and I look forward to a robust and insightful discussion. So, I will raise some questions. The first one to Chika. Who is Mr. Chika? Okay. So, the question is, the paper suggests that exchange rates have become the primary channel through which global shocks affect African economies. How should African central banks balance exchange rate flexibility with inflation control in the face of persistent external shocks? You have the floor for 2 minutes.
I will answer this question with trepidation because there will be no manipulation or video if I won't answer. I believe this is also a question of balance. That's what I believe. Rather than choosing one objective over another. Because I believe that a completely fixed exchange rate may create temporary comfort really on the other hand, I also feel that a completely unmanaged volatility creates uncertainty that discourages investment and wealth creation. So businesses do not necessarily demand a permanently strong currency. That's the position. They ask for reasonable, stable and predictable currency. And if I can plan, I am close to the space of my job. Yeah. So I will come on that. And if I can plan, and if I can price, and if I can budget, a bank can lend, and the investor can commit capital. Therefore, I support extensible exchange rate system. One of the exchange rate system. Several should allow market forces to determine the direction of why intervention to prevent sudden movement that will destroy confidence. Secondly, the currency should not rely only on interest rate increases and competition. The strong currency defense, I believe, is actually a productive economy. When the economy is productive, that's when you can defend the currency. Therefore, the more we export, the more we process our own raw materials, the more foreign investment we can attract, the less pressure we place on the exchange rate. In simple terms, the best long-term exchange rate policy is producing more than we consume. Finally, credibility matters a lot so much. Markets can tolerate difficult news. They dislike surprises. When policy is transparent, consistent and really credible, markets become calmer. And sometimes, confidence itself becomes part of the monetary policy. And that's what has led to the salary impact and progress of having the Nigerian currency stabilizing. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. The second question is to Mr. Okonjo-Iweala. And the question is, the paper argues that structural factors such as financial market debt and reserve buffers often matter more than the policy rate itself. Should African central banks place greater emphasis on building resilience rather than simply tightening monetary policy?
Thank you very much for the question. So to answer, yes, indeed, there are structural issues with African economies, and the paper has examined just the Nigerian versus the South African economy. The South African economy is a lot more integrated with global markets for historical reasons, more than Nigeria. But Nigeria is also coming up, dominating at least the West Africa. And of course, financial markets are also getting deeper. Now, so of course, economists will argue whether monetary policy rates are the real pressure points, because there seems to be a slightly unorthodox relationship between interest rates and inflation in Nigeria. The policy, the pass-through, is not as direct as you would find in many developed countries. So we run a risk. We run a risk that we may end up slowing down growth or caging growth while we're trying to manage inflation. In which case, Nigeria has maintained a very tight monetary policy stance, interest policy stance in the last few years, and of course, the multilateral bodies, World Bank, IMF, continue to advise us to maintain that very strong stance in order to maintain inflation, to reduce inflation, and to be able to get to the target of single-digit inflation. But the point now becomes that we need to ask ourselves some very cogent questions. We are a country run by mainly MSME companies, 39 million of them. The informal sector of Nigeria is the second largest informal sector in Africa after Zimbabwe. We're talking about 55 to 60% of the economy is informal. How much of that is actually linked with the banking sector and with especially the credit segment of the banking sector? Of recent, we have seen the new banks and fintechs making incursions into those informal aspects of the economy, but it's still at the level of deposit collection,
facilitating banking for them, facilitating payments for them. Nigeria is not a credit economy as much, not even as much as South Africa, where you will still find many people holding credit cards. In Nigeria, very few people and very few banks offer credit cards to people. So this creates a conundrum because the central bank will be afraid to say, you know what, the Monetary Policy Committee, do we reduce interest rate? What if we do and inflation spikes? Who gets the blame, especially from a post-crisis scenario as what we are right now? Okay, so that creates a challenge for us. So yes, whereas we are still going to be keeping an eye on monetary policy rates, but it's a time for us to actually really consider the very structure of our economy and the peculiarities of our economy. We shouldn't be afraid to write our own history in real time. And in real time, okay, this is where our economy is. We had inflation spiking to 34.8% as of December 2024. A lot of that came from, of course, some of the issues in the global market. Russia-Ukraine war, spiking the price of commodity. And that was when we realized that only 15% of our importation of wheat came from those two countries. And of course, when that happened, the thing also, there's a correlation indeed between the price of one major food commodity and others. So things like rice, like wheat, they move other prices as well in society. Maybe because people have to substitute, for other products like corn and maize when they can't get the wheat that they require. And so we had that scenario coming up in December 2024 before the rebasing. And of course, we see the moderation to 15 point, where we are right now, 16.67, I think. It went down 0.02% in the last, in June. So now the thing is to consider what to do with the economy, to say that listen, the structure of the economy is still rather, not as sophisticated as what obtains in developed countries, or even what we'll see in a country like South Africa. One of the reasons, some of the reasons, and I think I wrote an article on this, why inflation actually went down post-rebasing and was continuing on that downward trend was because of some of the rather unorthodox approaches that was taken in the market to reduce inflation. For example, when delegations would be sent to market unions to tell them not to increase prices, those things have effect in villages, in our little towns across the country. Because again, we have a scenario where sellers of goods can just get to the market and say, this is what I'm selling. And most of what Nigerians spend their money on remains in the seller's market. It is called seller's inflation. Piggybacking on the work of Professor Isabella Weber of Boston University. Like most Nigerians spend their money on some food, a lot of food, some shelter, maybe they're paying rent, or they're building their houses from the scratch themselves. The mortgage market is still very, very tiny in Nigeria. Okay? Some food, some shelter, a bit of clothing, some social, the school fees for their children, and their money is gone. In all of those markets, whether the food market or the shelter market, people are complaining about rents increasing now. Okay? All the school market, education for children, people are price takers. Most Nigerians are price takers. It is what you see, you buy. And so we now have to think about the economy in that regard. Whereas we want to be able to have strong monetary policy and also begin to see how Nigeria can tend towards some of the other economies in the world, so that by the time we tinker with NPR, the banks take the cue. If you reduce NPR, banks take the cue and reduce lending rate, which is hardly happens in Nigeria, or at least there'll be a lag. Or maybe for every 1% or for every 2% reduction in NPR in Nigeria, banks will probably reduce their lending rate by 1%.
Can you conclude, please?
Right, so in conclusion, essentially, thank you very much, but in conclusion, there's a need for us to own our economy, to own the structure of our economy, to own the stage at which the economy is right now, in order to make that choice between monetary policy rates and the other ways of tackling inflation in the economy. Thank you.
If I The paper was very well written, very clear results, no ambiguity whatsoever. So from there, I want to just establish 3 outcomes that stood out for me. One is the fact that there's a difference between the domestic monetary policy multiplier, especially for Nigeria. And it was explained as being maybe the result of the debt of the financial system in Nigeria. And I said, yes, maybe that's true. However, we also want to look at the monetary program that we are using. How do we calibrate the velocity of money? How do we, even if we are doing it well, velocity of money in the monetary program, have we calibrated it right? Especially given the high density and in-depth use of fintech, as well as the fact that money has increased, the velocity of money has increased exponentially since we embraced technology and all that. And then the second thing that struck me was the difference in the inflation variance between Nigeria and South Africa, and that it's a measure of institutional capacity and not monetary program superiority. So that made me a bit more comfortable, because I know how many times we have stayed in the monetary policy department think of whether our monetary policy framework was working or not. And so it means that it doesn't matter monetary policy framework that you're using, whether it is inflation targeting or hybrid monetary targeting. The most important thing is that it is not working efficiently for us, because monetary policy rate is suspect, and then the policy credibility is also an issue, as well as communication of monetary policy. And so I want to shake the ground a little bit by suggesting that we bring down our own African-centric monetary policy framework. What's wrong with having a monetary policy framework that incorporates price stability, yes, incorporates financial stability, yes, but also incorporates things like climate change, incorporate informality of our economy, because it is very, very huge. And that is why probably monetary policy rates are not hitting targets. And so that's what I want to suggest, that we can look at an African-centric monetary policy framework to see whether that can work better, because traditional Taylor's rule seems to have fallen apart here. The paper also brought out the fact that monetary policy is not a silver bullet. And so monetary policy has to work with other policies, especially fiscal policy. Monetary policy coordination is very, very clear from the output of the paper, from the policies that the paper brought out, that we need to have more coordination, even though that's happening now. But also to include things like climate change policies, to include things like informal sector indicators, to include indicators that would make us more resilient and ready to adapt, because like the Director of Monetary Policy said, global shocks have come to stay, and we should have resilient policies to tackle global shocks, because we are Africans and we always take the heat of the brunt of the global shocks. So coming to the food segments that I was asked, that is very interesting, and that we have always known monetary policy department, because actually, if you are calculating the inflation rate in Nigeria, food price takes over 60% of the basket, and so it is all over Africa. So we need to have policies that would incorporate both diversification of our economy, and also to make sure that we conserve the little foreign exchange that we reserve. What is wrong with having policies that will encourage maybe Nigeria or maybe in Africa goods? Consumption patterns will have to change, because mainly inflation and exchange rate is a reality. So can we look at how to encourage African-centric goods and services to be consumed in Africa? Not that we will no longer import things that we need. And then finally, to also talk about the food prices in terms of diversification of the economy. We have been talking about I will. I will be talking about diversification of the economy even from the time I was in school in the 1980s. So can we now bring out practical policies to make sure that the economy is diversified? Thank you so much.
I will invite now Ngozi for the fourth question. The paper highlights that monetary tightening alone cannot effectively shield economies from global shocks. What complementary fiscal and structural reforms should accompany monetary policy to improve resilience?
Happy to be in this forum today. I like where the presenter concluded the fact that you cannot just talk about the monetary policy without looking at supporting a monetary policy with broader reforms. And that's where I want to begin and to say that if you look at the paper and the bottom line that comes out is that monetary policy responses actually are defined by the structural systems, the structural factors that are different across the economies. And the first thing that we get from the paper, and which also the presenter was able to bring out, is the aspect of monetary surveillance. I have realized that in Nigeria, it's among the very first countries that is integrating AI into the data management. And I'm bringing this one because you cannot do monetary surveillance without real-time data. And real-time data architecture comes in handy because you are able to track the emerging economic risks, and you are also able to do good forecasting for inflation, and also you can use the technology to also automate the reporting system and therefore look at the screening risk, which means that you are able to embed also financial stability in that kind of reform. So I support the fact that monetary surveillance is critical, and this should come in with investments in real-time data, and therefore embracing new technologies, including the AI. The second thing that also I've noted as far as the Nigerian economy is concerned is that Nigeria is among the very first three countries that have embraced the central bank digital currency. And in the literature for the central bank digital currencies, one of the key things that is put forward in supporting the monetary policy is the fact that it tries to enhance financial inclusion, as well as lowering transaction costs. And in this case, it helps in strengthening the monetary policy process. This aside, the adoption of central bank digital currency is inhibited by various structural issues, including the fact that if we don't do much as far as the digital technology is concerned, then it becomes very difficult because of access and therefore use of this technology. The third thing that I also want to bring in is the fact that in the financial sector there are very many players. It's not just the banking sector, which monetary policy focus, or central banks focus on more, but also there are money markets now. Everybody is going to money market funds. There is insurance companies, and also we have pension funds and the like. And I think that you cannot depend financial markets without having collaboration among these other regulators. So I would say that collaboration, or whatever they are called, colleges with all the major players in the financial sector makes a difference in terms of deepening the financial market. And in this case, you'll find that in deepening the financial markets, for example, you need to expand the financial instruments. And I like what my colleague here talked about, matters to do with climate change.
So those structural issues are directly within the domain of the fiscal authority, but as I said, there is strong coordination between those arms of law, or tiers of government, to ensure that those critical issues are addressed. For instance, we try to, at the Central Bank of Nigeria, we try to dive down to clearly identify critical fiscal structural issues that impede on monetary policy transmission, and then see how we can have a roundtable with the fiscal authority. And that has been very, very productive in recent times. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody is panelist? Mr. Akaya, and then Mr.
Thank you. Quickly, I want to give some insight about those questions. The second question is very interesting for our union because we have a common monetary union. So the monetary policy is common, right? So no country have an impact on the monetary policy because we design it together. So the two main policies that we have to drive the economy is the budgetary policy and the fiscal, the revenue policy. So what we have remarked during these shocks that we have those several years is when you coordinate very well the budgetary policy, we can arrive to limit the impact in our economy. The fiscal deficit is very important because during 10 years, we have a very good fiscal deficit before the shock. Before 2020, we were even positive because the deficit, we were at plus 1%. That's why when the shock comes, we have used this opportunity to face the difficulties around these shocks. So I think what is very important is to continue to be sure that we have a fiscal deficit policy that continue to be sustainable. The second thing that I want to also bring in the discussion, according to the last question, when you want to make, you don't want to make all the efforts that being a public effort, you should continue to see how you can make the private sector performs. And it's what we have done in Togo, because in Togo, the business climate is something that's very important for us, because we know that we have limited opportunities to grow the economy, so it's only the private sector that can enhance and bring investment in the economy, and so that you can feel some difficulties according to some special issues like power, because you see that the state cannot continue to finance power and make sure that everybody gets access to power. The private sector that can do that, and should have a very good transparency policy according to the private sector. That is what I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My response would be, someone said the response to shocks. How do we respond to shocks? And someone also asked about, don't we know our economy enough to have anticipated what happened when Russia and Ukraine? Of course, we know our economy. I mean, every economy has partners on the trade. The people we import things from, the people we also export to. Every economy. So, but this is the essence of global shocks. And when it happens, of course, we're trying to build the capacity to respond in a kind of economic jiu-jitsu. For those who know how to fight judo, you use your opponent's strength to overcome them, their weight to overcome them. So that's the essence of this gathering here today, to say how can African economies stop being responders to shocks and be able to use those shocks to power up themselves. So if you look back, for Nigeria since 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, there was a shock. It was positive for Nigeria. And then we went on in the early 80s, there was a crash in commodity. If you look at, of course, let's fast forward to 2007, the Great Recession, the collapse of American financial markets, and of course around the world. And of course recently COVID-19, and now the geopolitical issues we have. African economies have been responding so far, but the challenge is how do we use those shocks to power ourselves up. Of course, if you ask me, the simple answer that comes to mind now is that Africa must consolidate on this inter-African trade. And AFCFTA has been powering up, especially since the new issues around legal and labor policies and tariffs by the US government that they have been levying on different countries in the world. So our challenge is number one, we consolidate agriculture, we move away from the Malthusian reality whereby Thomas Malthus had said there that human population will grow faster than the production of food. And it was very wrong, because with technology, food production has been able to grow faster in most other parts of the world apart from Africa. And so we must move away from that. Of course, we are focusing on food security, food sovereignty in Nigeria. Where it's a journey, not a destination. AFCFTA also. And of course, recently the World Bank actually said, we brought a policy in March, a paper that said that it is now okay for countries around the world to industrialize. And some people criticize them and say for 30 years we have told African countries that there's no need for industrialization. But that what it says is that we must take the initiative. So, government should come and go. The management of the economy is the constant. And to be able to, they say if you don't measure it, you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Are we making progress? Yes. Is it fast enough? Perhaps not. And so, but we know our work is called out for us as managers of the economy to continue to trade with the world, but to also find opportunities for industrialization, to solve structural problems like the gentleman from Abia State said. Abia is one example in Nigeria that have been able to take some hold of the power issue. What is almost obvious now is that every state must have to take control and solve that problem from the ground up. And of course, some of the states there have been enabled as well. So that we can solve the structural problem before we start to talk about, of course, while the monetary policy people, which is the central bank, will also continue to do the best work that we can. So everything has to move together at the same point in time. But our work is called out for us. Thank you.
That we have a commodity buffer rule, so that we save up when we are having booms, and so that we can use it when we have shocks like this. On the issue of what we do about structural issues, structural transformation and all that, I would like to suggest that while not overlooking the monetary policy, we should zero in on measuring dynamic liquidity management, measurable dynamic liquidity management in monetary policy by looking at fintech, by looking at cross-border digital payment platforms and all that. And also to suggest that we do real, I know we're doing it now, but we should now drill down further towards shock forecasting and early warning systems. That way central banks should employ things like AI, assisted forecasting, high data frequency forecasting, payment system analytics, and things like that. I think that's the only way to get through some of the structural shocks, but beyond that is to focus on the private sector. Private sector, private sector, private sector. They are the ones that would bring us out of the structural issues and bottlenecks that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just want to respond on the issue brought up by the Ford Foundation And I want to look at it from an angle of, practicing a monetary policy that is able to provide incentives for de-risking the informal sector, de-risking the agricultural sector, de-risking also our manufacturing sector. I think that may be able to connect us very well, bring a good link between the monetary policy and the production side. And of course, the two of them would work very hand in hand in terms of ensuring that the monetary policy meets its objective.
Well, I'm not going to say. I just want to add that the expectation has been that central banks will perform miracles, and including making the rent fall. Whether the monetary policy can be produced through, you can't generate the resources, you cannot do the cost, and you can't return logistics, you can't secure highways, you cannot manufacture fertilizer. So monetary policy alone cannot solve inflation. It's like asking the goalkeeper to score the goals and still keep a clean sheet. It's not very possible. The entire team must play, government, fiscal authorities, private sector, and so on and so forth. And one thing I would say, if I might know, the monetary policy is not successful when economies are plummeting. I told you I'm from the streets, really. It's only successful when organic businesses can plan and invest and employ people and sleep better at night. And but we have one advantage, big advantage in Africa. We're not governed by legacy system. To some extent, we can defraud, not digital tenants, over banking, fintech, regional trade, young entrepreneurs. If you build resilience in this region, I believe you can. So those challenges can become tomorrow's competitive advantage. Thank you.
The time is over. Then I will conclude. Thank you to the presenter and all the panelists. Thank you, the participants. Today's discussion has reinforced a simple yet powerful message. Global shocks are likely to remain a permanent feature of the policy landscape. While monetary policy remains essential, resilience increasingly depends on stronger institutions, deeper financial markets, credible policy frameworks, adequate reserve buffers, and structural reforms. The challenge before African central banks is therefore not only how to respond to shocks, but also how to build economies that can withstand. I think it's over.
Please, another round of applause for that. Can you give a double-edged sword round of applause? You know, we just talked about monetary policy, which is just one pillar, but the applause should be more than that. Please, a round of applause for that robust conversation. And let me also just quickly recognize representatives of the IMF, the European Union, the World Bank, government MDAs here in the room. I see NEPC, private sector organizations, NESG is also here. The president of the Nigerian Economic Society, Dr. Ababa Yusuf, is here. We also have Seaman in the room. Thank you very much. FMBQ, financial markets stakeholders. We also do have the National Coordinator of Nigeria After Coordination Office, Ms. Patience Okala. Thank you very much for coming. Let me also give this gentle reminder that the governor has just only stepped out to briefly attend an important official engagement and will be joining us soon. And of course, still ahead today is one of the most anticipated conversations of the day, our marquee dialogue with the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, GCOA. I can assure you to be well worth the wait. We have an exceptional conversation lined up on the future of global trade, economic resilience, and Africa's place in a rapidly changing world.
Pie in the sky kind of prediction and so on about what works, what doesn't. Okay? Now my colleague Kenan has told me that I spent too much time on the first slide, so I need to move on to the second one. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. The other thing, by the way, also, is that we are used to thinking about big investments being made in places like the US, in places like China, and so on. But that is not what is happening. That is not what is happening in developing economies. In developing economies, actually, a lot of the investments are much smaller. They're much more diffuse. Okay? Now, there's an implication for this. If you're making big investments, if a company is making big investments, it has to ultimately show its investors that it's going to get this money back. How does it get this money back? In part by efficiency improvements. And that often means getting rid of expensive workers. So it is absolutely reasonable for workers in places like the United States and China to be worried that their jobs are going to go. It is reasonable because these firms are making big investments. But that's not the case in most developing economies. In most developing economies, things are much smaller. In most developing economies also, these technologies are likely to actually complement workers in small businesses, complement farmers in small farms and so on. They're far more likely to do that. Again, I'm not talking about conjectures, I'm talking about actual experience, and that's what we summarize in the report. Okay? All right. Now, so here are the AI effects. I'm going to show you a few slides now. So the first one is there's widespread but misplaced pessimism. Tune it out. If you're a Nigerian, tune it out. Okay? Because if you focus on this one, there is a danger that countries like Nigeria, countries like India and others will miss this industrial revolution. Okay? And you have to remember, you have to just look around yourself and say, what happened when you missed the industrial revolution? You ended up being behind for 200 years. Can't risk it again. Okay. All right. The other thing that you sort of see is that the world economy is not doing particularly well. Investment rates are declining, potential growth rates are declining, and so on. AI comes at a really good time. And I'll show you some estimates that AI has the potential for returning us to the levels of growth that we experienced before COVID. And actually, in the upside case, it will actually return us to growth rates that we experienced in the 2000s. And remember, the 2000s was a golden age of economic development. Okay? All right. So I'm going to show you a few slides. The first one is, if you look at this slide, you will see that people in Europe and the Americas appear to be worried. They're much more likely to be worried about AI than excited about it. But what's really healthy is that you see in Asia and in Africa, people are more excited than worried about it. If you look at this, you actually see what has been happening to growth rates. So if you look at the world economy, it was growing at around 3.2% in the decade before COVID. And if you look at it for this year, we were predicting that it would go at 2.5. Okay? That's a big come down, right? If you look at advanced economies, that rate has gone from 2% to 1.5%. If you look at emerging markets and developing countries, that rate has gone from 5.2 to 3.6. By the way, this is, we still have a problem here, because take out the US from advanced economies, and that number goes from 1.5 to 0.9, 0.8. It's very low. Take out India and China from the emerging markets and developing economies. That number goes from 3.6 to 2.6. So what will happen is that you miss out on this technology, and China and the US and perhaps India are going to do fine. They're the largest high-income country, the largest upper middle-income country, the largest low-income country. They're going to do okay. The gap between them and other economies like Nigeria and South Africa will only grow. Right? You can't miss this. Right? Now, so what we did do, by the way, was we tried to estimate what are the returns from AI. Right? And of course, naturally, AI is not estimated with the same precision as electricity and ICT. But roughly speaking, if you look at the boost, the productivity boost that we got from electricity, it was about 1 percentage point of GDP growth. Okay? If you look at ICT, it was about half of that. If you look at AI, under reasonable scenarios, it will be something in between. Okay? It could be on the upside, it could be as high as electricity. On the lower side, it could be low. But a lot of this, how much it actually leads to in terms of productivity improvements and so on, this is something that actually depends on policy choices. So this is not a given. Okay? So for that reason, what we say is that one should try one's hardest to actually take advantage of it. Now here's another reason why one should be less pessimistic in developing economy, much more optimistic about it. The chart on the left shows you what share of the jobs are likely to be affected adversely by AI. That would be replaced basically by AI. If you look at that ratio, that's about 10% of jobs, about 1 in 10 jobs in the poorer economies. And it's more like 30, 40% in the case of upper income countries. So of course those countries are actually rationally far more likely to see labor force displacement. You will not see the same displacement. You're not likely to see the same displacement in most developing countries which are still agrarian, which still depend a lot on small businesses and so on. Okay? The other thing that you sort of say, well, but they depend on small businesses. Small businesses are not capable of actually using AI. All our evidence indicates that in developing countries, we don't see that much of a difference in how likely small businesses are to use AI as compared to large businesses. So actually, there isn't grounds for that pessimism. Okay? You should not think that small businesses. If you look at that, for example, on the right side, you actually see that those ratios are pretty much the same or high for small firms as well as large firms in developing countries. So one of the nice things you'll see in this WDR, in the World Development Report, is that a lot of this evidence is for developing countries, which generally you don't see. Those are not numbers on which a lot of debates are based. So in countries like Nigeria, this report should reset these debates. Okay? And you should debate based on these technology, on these numbers. Now, there aren't as many numbers for these countries as we would like, but this is something that can be fixed too, and we will fix this over time, because not only is this a policy report, it's also a research report. Okay, let me go on. So again, like I said, I'm not talking about possible things. I'm talking about things that are already happening. So in agriculture, for example, in the Indian state of Telangana, we're already seeing the productivity effects. In the case of Kenya, for example, you find that using predictive AI technologies, the judiciary has actually cut caseloads massively. I mean, this is a big deal in countries like Nigeria and countries like India and so on. These huge caseloads, and it looks almost hopeless, and it will take decades to sort of, it might take decades without AI. With AI, it could take just years, okay, or even months. And then if you look at Bangladesh, for example, you find diagnostics and so on. All these are not, again, like I say, these are not hypotheticals. These are actual numbers. Okay? All right. So what are AI strategies? What should they be? I'm going to quickly show you 6 slides and then I'll stop. So the first one is, as I said, adaptation has to be the biggest part of this. And it's essentially, this chart over here summarizes the structure of the World Development Report. It looks at what are the things that you need, which is essentially capabilities, concentration, and complements. What are the strategies? Adopt, adapt, advance. And like I said, the biggest part would be adaptation for most countries. And then if you look at the development effects, you actually see they're economic, they're social, and they're political. These need to be managed. And then the role of governments, and because we sort of spend a lot of time on this one, there are 3 chapters. First, governments as enablers of AI, governments as users of AI, and governments as regulators of AI. And I'll just quickly give you a snapshot of the findings. Okay? So that's the part over there. So this, by the way, the chart on the right looks at World Bank projects. So we actually look to see what are government projects procuring in terms of AI and so on. So whenever we could get the numbers, that's what we did. And that's what I meant by saying predictive AI in back-end use. That's what seems to come out the most. That's what's most in demand. Okay? All right. And so here is a comparison, by the way, of firms in the US as compared to firms in our surveyed low and middle-income countries especially. And you find many more similarities between these firms rather than, especially the smaller firms. This part basically indicates that, so a lot of what I'm telling you is based on a small set of rigorous evaluations and a lot of other evidence which is more circumstantial, but we checked it to make sure that we are not getting ahead of the evidence here. But what we sort of find is that there is a need for much better analysis of AI-related interventions. This is underway too, by the way. This is underway at the World Bank, it is underway in places like Nigeria, India, and so on. And we'll be informed a lot more. The next one, there's always this concern that people have saying, well, if Nigeria depends on US technologies or Chinese technologies, there could come a point where Nigeria ends up being held hostage, okay? Because the US might actually deny these technologies, China might deny these technologies. So, which means that now you have a choice. You either pray, which is not good policy. The second one is to sort of say, okay, you know what, I'm going to aim for sovereignty myself. I'm going to invest a lot. Most countries don't have the money to compete with the US and China. No country has enough money to compete with the US and China. So the next one is actually, and this is the mainstay of policies in places like India and so on, someone will know more. But basically what they're looking for is interoperability, so that you can use Chinese technologies, you can use US technologies, you can use your own indigenous technologies and all too. Interoperability is a far more practical and a far more effective strategy for most middle powers. Okay? You don't, right? Okay. Now, and by the way, pretty much every country is a middle power other than the US and China. So here you sort of see is that don't obsess too much with mandatory standards. Don't try to say, okay, how do I make sure that AI does not lead to adverse political impacts or social impacts and so on? How can I do that through government fiat? And last year we did a World Development Report on standards, and which basically indicated successful standard setting starts as a foundation of industry-led standards. So basically governments have to create the conditions in which it makes sense for industry to get together and set voluntary standards. And that is happening already. Okay? And then, on top of that, if you find that industry cannot solve these problems themselves and so on, then you think about mandatory standards. So here again, and by the way, it's far easier to help industry arrive at voluntary standards that they self-enforce, rather than come up with mandatory standards which you then have to enforce, and we often don't have the quality infrastructure to actually do so. Okay? Now, so what's the World Bank group trying to do? So essentially what we have is a three-pronged thing, which is scale small AI, okay? Call this AI the suitcase, or call this AI that can work with intermittent internet access, with not that much electricity, etc., etc. That's not enough though. You have to invest in country capacity, and that's not enough either. You also have to sort of continue to build AI foundations. For a country like Nigeria, this is all three of these are equally important. I could imagine some smaller economies that can do with just 1 and 2, but for a big economy, a big ambitious economy like Nigeria, you do have to do all three. Okay? Once again, as I said, what we find in our World Bank Group operations that you already see in the case of education, in the case of agriculture, in the case of legal judicial services, and a whole lot of other things, you already see very promising applications of these things. So let me conclude with a summary again. AI impacts are not the same as in advanced economies. Don't extrapolate from their debates about what are the dangers and what are the opportunities in economies like Nigeria and economies like Ghana, like Mali, etc. The second one is because AI technologies are even more context specific than previous GPTs, it's not going to be just simply adopt. And you have too short time horizons or too much urgency to think about waiting to have enough resources to advance the technologies. Adaptation has to be a big part of it. This does not, for a big country, it doesn't rule out investing in advancing some technologies and all too. But in general, adaptation has to be the mainstay of it. And then finally, as I sort of said, is that the AI strategies require making some choices. You have a choice between generative, predictive, and agentic. Generally, predictive AI is going to lead to the greatest cost benefit. Then you have a choice between adoption, adaptation, advancement. Again, adaptation is the most sensible, the most feasible thing. You can be unregulated, or you can have voluntary industry-led regulations, or you can have mandatory government-determined regulations. Go for the middle one. And then you can be passive, or you can invest in interoperability, or you can try for AI sovereignty. Go for the middle one. And then finally, you can not invest in AI because you feel like this is not something that's beyond you, it's too mysterious. Or you can have small, diffuse investments, or you can have large, concentrated investment. Go for the middle one. I'll stop here and take some questions.
I was looking around and was speaking, people were hanging on to each and every word that came out.
So I've learned to be very careful about what I say in Nigeria, because the last time I spoke over here, when I went to the airport, the person at security told me, "Hey, I recognize you. You're Mr. Gill, and you don't know what the hell you're talking about."
But he was listening to you.
Yeah, he said, "I saw you on TV. You're totally wrong. I don't know what the government just told you. He was completely wrong." Anyway,
Right?
so it went on like this.
But the governor came and he was listening to you. Right? No, it was wonderful, really. And I read a bit sometimes, right? And I've read quite a lot of things about artificial intelligence, and I use it. I use Siri, and I use Google's platform and GPT. But I must say, I've developed a very different perspective. I pay for ChatGPT and I pay for Gemini too, and I use Siri, and I read quite a lot. And I must say, after listening to you, I have very different and better perspective. And the main message I take, 200 people who are in the room, have developed
a similar perspective, that people in emerging markets have less to fear than those who live in the US or in Europe. And there are positive things, and there are opportunities. That's the main message I take.
Absolutely.
And the second, time is short. Don't let the train leave the station. There's urgency. And the small suitcase that you mentioned, you have to keep in mind. But anyway, we have an opportunity to ask questions in the week before lunch. So let me stop there. Who would like to ask the first question?
So, by the way, I presented this, I think this is the third or the fourth presentation of a report that we haven't yet published. But I presented this in China last week. And at the end of it, somebody summarized it really beautiful. Actually, I think it was Justin Lin who summarized it very well. And he said that if you looked at the differential between the richest country and the poorest country before the Industrial Revolution, the richest country he said was Netherlands. I forget which was the poorest country. But he said it was like 4 times that. By the end of the Industrial Revolution, it was close to 100 times.
Yeah.
So the point here is simply, if you listen too much to those debates that are happening over there, one should listen to them. And of course there are some risks. Anything good comes with risks. So you have to be aware of those. But you can't let that risk paralyze you into inaction. So I think one of the things that and by the way, it has paralyzed some countries into inaction. Unfortunately, these are the countries that could actually benefit the most. So if you look at the poorest economies, I'm talking about the IDA countries and so on, many of them don't even have an AI strategy. And by the way, an AI strategy, look at that, it's not that complicated. It's not that complicated. It's mainly adaptation. And then you have to sort of see which kind of things. So that's one thing. But the point is, you miss this, and you're going to have another, you're going to be, 50 years from now, you look and say, what the heck did we do?
Or maybe 20 years, right? Not even 50 years. Well, I would not be here 15 years from now. But anyway, who wants to ask the first question? Please raise your hands. One person here. Let's take 3 questions. One. Governor, you have the first chair. You paid for this. Let's have the governor ask a question, right? Governor goes first.
Thank you very much indeed for that insightful presentation. And I think it helps to clarify some of the blurred lines, because my take is that not only in developing countries, but also in the advanced world, there's a lot of fuzziness around what is obviously a potentially highly impactful topic. And even when we listen, quite frankly, to some of the stories with respect to strictly the private sector and investing in AI, even that can be very discouraging depending on how you view it. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on something you closed with, which is strategy. Is there anywhere, and I take note of the fact that you said something is being published, very shortly, but how do you see that all developing to ensure that, strategies, the appropriate strategies are properly articulated and absorbed along a wide spectrum?
So, we actually did a mapping of all countries that had AI strategies, which ones didn't have an AI strategy. I would have shown you that, but when I was about to present it in China, I was told that the map was wrong. Okay? So, yeah. And there's no map on which the Chinese and the Indians agree on. so we can't actually show maps. But what it showed was that the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, many of them did not have an AI strategy at all. I think the exception among the low-income countries was Rwanda and perhaps Ethiopia. But other than that, they weren't. Now, if you ask me, so if you ask me if I met Paul Kagame, could I give him a strategy? I could give him something that I say, okay, beat this, beat adaptation, beat mostly relying on predictive AI, beat relying mostly on voluntary standards, and maybe you can actually refine it more then. But the elements of a strategy are right there for a low-income country. And as you climb up higher, you become more sophisticated, like Nigeria or like India and so on. More work is needed. But again, once you sort of look at these things, I mean, if you look at if you look at the concentration part, the capabilities part, and the complements part, if you look at these three A's, it gives you a roadmap to say, okay, here's how I'm going to do it. So, for example, the next time you talk to the minister who is in charge of the AI strategy here, I bet you could ask him a few questions saying, why are you asking the government to go on mandatory standards when that never worked? Why would it work now? Maybe that's a good answer, etc. So that's the way I would do it. But the problem is that the countries that really need a strategy, because what a strategy does is it rules out certain things and it rules in certain things. And it makes things feasible. So even if you're the poorest economy on the planet, you need a strategy.
I'll manage.
Just like to, I was in China invited in a symposium, Chinese university. I don't remember the name of the university, but I found out that they were using AI everywhere. Even in farming, we went to visit a farm where irrigation, everything is controlled by AI. How to reduce dependency? Because AI, if we don't tackle it, if we don't do research on it, we will be dependent on other countries.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yes, I know, it's a big shot. But the thing is that the first one is, I think for Africa, everybody says, AI for Africa. Well, if you take a look at productivity growth across the world and see what has been happening, it's been coming down. It's been coming down in advanced economies, it's been coming down. I think there are few exceptions. One of them is India, I think, and a few other places. Why do I talk about productivity growth? Because productivity growth is a summary measure of the inefficiency or the rate of reduction of inefficiency in an economy. And the main thing that distinguishes emerging markets from rich countries is that they're inefficient. They're inefficient in the use of talent, in the use of capital, in the use of energy, in the use of land, everything. Okay? Now, one of the simplest things is to say, okay, how do you increase productivity in agriculture? AI has a huge potential. Huge potential. And by the way, maybe other things have a potential too in agriculture. But if you look at productivity in general, if you look at productivity growth in general, declining growth rates and so on, there's nothing else on the horizon that will actually help to increase productivity other than AI. And AI is not a minor thing, it's a massive thing. So on, to the extent that you can increase efficiency through greater trade, well, the potential is not that great as compared to 10 years back. If it is demography, well, the potential is not there as much. If it's greater investment, well, the potential isn't there that much because private investment is the other side of the coin of public debt. So if public debt is very high, private investment is going to be depressed. So you got nothing else. Okay? And then you get this boon of AI. So the question is, how do you harness it? Okay? And in agriculture, you can harness it. In medical care, you can harness it. You can do things you can tackle these big problems of medical care in rural areas, education in rural areas, huge backlogs in justice, agricultural extension services. These are core responsibilities of governments in most countries, in most developing countries. So in a sense, what is, is bringing these new solutions. One has to experiment with them, but I would actually say even that, and so I told you, you have context specificity, yes, which means that something that was invented in London or that was invented for patients in London won't work in Abuja or in Lagos. But it may well be that when Lagos comes up with a good adaptation of that technology, it'll work in Accra, it'll work in Abuja, it'll work in Kano. So you don't have to do it for every specific context, you just need to get nearer and nearer to it. So when India invests a lot in these things, it'll help in Bangladesh as well, and Pakistan, and Myanmar, and so on, So I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, if one thinks about these things seriously, you see the risks very clearly because those are the ones that are being amplified in the debates in advanced economies. But the benefits are generally, there isn't as much of a light that's shone on the benefits, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. So we have now 5.5 minutes left, if I'm correct. Let's take next question here. Please kindly be short so that we have opportunity for more questions. Right there.
You have to be short because I can't remember the beginning of your question.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Nekome. I'm CEO of OPE Nigeria. In your presentation, you mentioned that you on voluntary standards and interoperability, mentioned that this has to be something that comes from the market or from the industry. But we've seen a scenario in Nigeria where for the payment systems, where there is no mandating by the regulators of interoperability, it has not worked. Why do you think that AI interoperability will be achieved without mandating it? Thank you.
I'm not saying that all of AI's benefits will be achieved or all of AI's risks will be mitigated. But we wrote a whole report about how standards can help. So how standards can help development and how standards can hamper development. Right? And what we find is that one of the problems is that the main difference between middle-income countries, emerging markets, and advanced economies are in there. Advanced economies depend a lot more on voluntary standards than on mandatory standards as compared to emerging markets.
Correct.
And emerging markets have much weaker national quality infrastructure, which is needed to enforce these standards. So on both sides, they're using standards too much and they have less capacity to actually do it.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things. The other thing that you mentioned, as you were asking this question, the thought I had was, if you talk with the Indian private sector, you talk to people like Nandan Nilekani and others who are thinking about these problems in the case of India, I think a lot of the lessons from India and Nigeria can be shared with each other. So India and Nigeria should be like this, in terms of this thing. Because India and Nigeria are both middle powers in this sense. You're not going to be able to catch up to the US or to China. And you don't have to in everything. But on the other hand, you want to sort of make sure that things like interoperability, where should you seek sovereignty? Where should you pray? And where should you have a specific strategy of interoperability? And I think this is something that you can actually learn a lot from. But there is no substitute for taking these technologies and infusing them into the economy. You go to any city in China, from Gansu in the interior to Hangzhou on the coast, you see that these standards or you see that these technologies have been infused. The same thing is true in India. If you find, for example, take a look at India's digital stack and so on. India has managed to make these technologies available to very poor people, for very small transactions, of small people, So I think that the same thing has to be done. But China is perfect example.
Amazing. Yep. One more question.
Yes. Excuse me, sir. Can I just come in here quickly?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. We have the director of the IT department of the central bank. She's watching online and she sent her question. She's thanking the presenter Dr. Gill, for your insightful presentation, and also to note that the CBN has started its AI implementation journey by establishing an AI policy and an AI strategy and having an AI playbook which has a 4-year roadmap. So the question now to you is, how should regulators ensure that AI models used in credit scoring, anti-money laundering, and financial supervision reflect local economic realities rather than assumptions embedded in models trained on advanced AI? So very important question.
You know, so I'm thinking she's a lawyer because she's asking a question to which she already knows the answer. I bet she knows a heck of a lot more about how to use AI in organizations like the central bank. But one of the things I think that so I actually heard an exchange like this in Portugal a few weeks ago between a central banker and the IMF. And because the IMF also has a strategy like this one, an AI strategy. And I think what the central bank should be doing is asking the IMF to intermediate between central banks what their AI strategies and all are. Because every bank is doing this, you know. So I would actually say you should, I bet you know the answer to this question. And I know that people at the IMF may actually need that place to actually answer this question.
Okay, thank you. Lotus, final question.
Well, AI needs a lot of financing, needs from...
Lotus is from Cornell University. She has a think tank there.
I am the director of the Emerging Markets Institute at Cornell University. And so AI needs a lot of financing, and also countries need to see where they are going. Semiconductors, LLMs, etc., talent, etc. So the question is that in Africa, and tomorrow I'm moderating a panel about all the fragilities in many countries, so maybe here is an opportunity to collaborate. You cannot have everything in Nigeria. You suggested collaborating with India, but what about first collaborating within Africa in the framework of the African Common Free Trade Agreement? So how do you see that?
I completely agree with you, because actually, given the fact that I keep saying that AI is more context specific, so if a neighboring country actually ends up investing in adapting technology that it gets from, let's say, the UK or from India and so on, then you don't have to invest nearly as much, you just need to collaborate with that country. So absolutely right. So to the extent that agriculture has similarities, to the extent that economic structures have similarities, social norms, health conditions, etc. So to the extent that they are context specific, regional cooperation has to be a big part of this. And we actually mentioned this in the report. If you're disappointed with any of my answers, if you have a lot of questions in your thing, just wait a week and look at the report. It's really well done. It's long, but you can use AI to give you short versions of it.
So, how do people get the report? Those who don't know the World Bank.
The report will
Professor Ngozi, I'm Director, International Center for Regional Integration and Trade Research at Nnamdi Azikiwe University. But before then, I had worked at the Central Bank and retired meritoriously after 35 years. So I worked here as a director and then was seconded to West African Monetary Institute in Accra, Ghana as the Director General.
Wow, that is great, man. Nice to hear that. Master, we have a few questions to ask you, just 2 questions, and then we will let you go. So our first question is, we heard that the government has 3 roles in AI, as an enabler, a user, and a regulator. How can Nigeria get this balance right to support innovation and economic growth? In innovation and economic growth.
The fact is this, AI has come to stay. If you allow yourself to take a backstage on AI, you will become moribund, you will become a latecomer. Nigerians are very smart. The Nigerian government is in a hurry to reform Nigeria. And And so the fastest way to leapfrog into the next sphere of things in the world is through AI. But you have to do it responsibly, and it has to have strategies as well as platforms that would ensure that people do it responsibly. Because it's also a responsibility that you have a tool in your hand that you can use to do things does not mean that you have to do it in a negative form. So positivity is very important. Managing risks that come from AI is also very important. And so for Nigeria, we have to first of all set up an AI strategy. Who does what and for what? And if you do this, what will be the repercussion? And if you do this, what will be the gain? Because gains are a lot. So that's the only way that Nigeria can do that. And Nigeria is very quick when it comes to catching up with things. Nigerians have already been players in that field. So what is required now is for government to now put structures on ground for the players and every other roles in that sphere to be well guided so that people do it and do it responsibly but also productively, because it's going to drive the services sector in the near future. It's already driving it, but it's going to even drive it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So goods still face payment barriers. The financial systems are still fragmented. There is lack of digital infrastructure in the continent, and regulatory frameworks are poorly harmonized. So we see the missing link, the missing pillar as digital financial integration. And that is in the form of harmonized payments, digital infrastructure, fintechs, and regulatory harmonization. Why does it matter? As you know, Africa trades less than itself than any other region. Europe has achieved 68% of our regional trade, Asia at 58%, North America 1-6, but we're still battling with 15 to 18% within Africa. But with the African Continental Free Trade Area and the progress with the institutional framework, we see that market access is no longer the issue. But the issue is that the cost and the friction of moving money across borders, is now the big challenge. So there's been some progress in making that operational. Also, Africa has also been experiencing a digital revolution where financial inclusion has expanded to 58% of adults. There's been mobile money adoption of up to 40% and rapid growth in fintech. However, there are some gaps in cross-border payments, and the interoperability is still far-fetched. So digital infrastructure is still uneven, regulatory harmonization lags, and there are trade costs. There are still high trade costs within Africa. So the core argument is that the progress in one area is constrained by the weakness in others. So this is a map showing, Africa has uneven distribution of infrastructure, digital infrastructure indicators such as access to electricity and broadband internet. You can see the countries on green are the ones with the highest level of both internet penetration and access to electricity. You can see the North African countries of Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, as well as Botswana and South Africa are the main leaders, while Nigeria is at the medium level of digital infrastructure measures. So the central thesis is that Africa's integrations challenge is systemic, and digital financial integration is a major challenge. It's a major challenge. Digital financial integration is the connective infrastructure that can link trade, financial markets, and digital infrastructure, as well as investments in fintech and innovation, and that could really trigger industrialization, regional value chains, and economic development. So these are some of the channels that which can visualize that across sectors. Under trade, digital financial integration can enable seamless border payments, reduce settlement costs, and foster customs clearance. Within the financial sector, we talk about interoperable payment systems, local currency settlement through apps, which it's the platform that affects and also digital infrastructure like broadband payments. So across all the sectors, highlighted here, digital financial integration can really promote its effectiveness and operationalization. So these are like a 5-pillar policy framework. We start by, we think that to operationalize this digital financial integration, we need to expand PAPs and local currency settlements, invest in broadband, fiber, and regional infrastructure, prioritize interoperability access, mobile money, and fintech, harmonize digital payments and cybersecurity and data governance, and also embed digital financial integration within national development strategies. And this is within the purview of different organizations. We think African Bank can really expand the PAPS platform. The FDB will work on the infrastructural finance. AU Commission can focus on policy coordination, while the after secretariats can do the regulatory alignment. Central banks can work on the payments, interoperability, while private sector can work on increasing investment and innovation. And this is like a roadmap, short-term goals of expanding PAPs, mid-term of regional regulatory sandboxes, and then the long-term of integrating the digital frameworks. So I end on this note that the success of the AFCFTA will depend not only on removing tariffs, but on removing the financial, digital, and regulatory barriers that continue to divide African markets. And the three concise takeaways are to integrate payments, connect infrastructure, and harmonize regulation. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, for another excellent presentation. And just to start by welcoming you all once again to what I believe is going to be very important. I believe is an important and deepening regional economic integration through cross-border payments, fintech, infrastructure, and policy coordination. The importance of economic integration for in Africa is not a new concept. For decades, Africa has spoken about integration. We have signed treaties, we have established regional economic communities for years, and most recently, as was just recently said, we have launched the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which we have, as we know, is the largest trade area in the world by number of participating countries. But the reality is that we tend to have done the, should I call it the paper part of building this market. We seem to have moved a lot faster. You can say building this market on paper faster than we have been able to build the systems that allow that market to function. So as a result, today, a business can legally sell goods across African borders, but often cannot pay or receive payment quickly, cheaply, or even predictably. And also they have difficulties also getting payments or paying in local currency. A truck will find it easier to cross a border faster than a payment. You have situations now, a digital entrepreneur may be able to build a Pan-African platform, but still faces dozens of licensing regimes across various African countries. And these are not isolated problems. I believe they are symptoms of what the paper presented describes as a systems integration challenge rather than just a trade challenge. And I think this paper presents an important insight. It argues that the next frontier of African integration is no longer merely reducing tariff. That's one of the things he ended with very clearly. It is building interoperable payment systems. It is harmonized regulation. It is building resilient digital infrastructure, trusted data governance, as well as coordinated institutions that are capable of allowing trade, finance, and technology to reinforce one another. And indeed, the empirical evidence that was presented in the paper suggests that countries around the world with stronger digital ecosystems consistently achieve stronger regional integration outcomes. So this changes the whole conversation around economic integration. Because if the argument is that digital integration has become one of the strongest predictors of regional integration, then it means investments in payment systems, investments in fintech, in digital identity, in broadband infrastructure, and regulatory coordination can no longer be treated across the country as just mere sectoral policies. It means they have become or should become continental economic strategy. But deeper integration, if that's our goal and should be our goal, also introduces new questions. How do we ensure this interoperability without sacrificing sovereignty? The presenter mentioned PAPS. I remember PAPS has been there for quite a lot of time. We only heard about it a lot more recently, but PAPS has been in operation for several years. And when we go around different countries, we found that using sovereignty was an issue. They understood, many of these countries understood the importance, how relevant it was, how valuable it was. But the simple question that was preventing it from being used was countries didn't want to give up what they perceived as a loss of their sovereignty. So how do we do this without sacrificing sovereignty? Another question we need to ask, and maybe our panelists should look into, how do we encourage innovation without increasing systemic risk? We know that systemic risk has increased significantly, particularly in recent times. How do we harmonize regulation with respect to national realities? The 54 countries in Africa, they are very different. They have different histories. They speak different languages. They have different peculiarities. They have different cultures and so on. How do we pull all this together at the same very different countries and situations without, while respecting the uniqueness of these different cultures and countries? How do we ensure that smaller economies benefit just as much as the larger ones? You know that saying that when they say no policy, there are always winners and losers in every policy. No country wants to be one of the losers. They all want to be winners. How do we ensure that the smaller economies that are more vulnerable benefit as much as the largest ones? Because if you cannot ensure that, you'll find that many of them would not be willing to integrate. And perhaps more importantly, how do we ensure that Africa builds one integrated financial ecosystem instead of 54 digital connected islands? Now, I'm making a distinction between the two. There's a difference between an integrated financial ecosystem and 54 digitally connected countries. Most of our countries are digitally connected. You can transfer money across the countries currently, or are they connected? And I think the goal should be building an integrated African financial ecosystem rather than just having all the 54 countries digitally connected. That should not be the goal. These questions, to me, have become even more urgent as the global economy today is being reshaped by geopolitical fragmentation, by technological disruption, by supply chain realignment, and growing competition for investment. So in this new world, regional integration is no longer simply about competitiveness like we have been told for many, many years. It is increasingly about resilience. I believe that Africa now has an opportunity to leapfrog traditional integration pathways, not by simply replicating what other regions did decades ago, though of course lessons are important, are useful, but I think it should be more by designing a digital financial architecture that's actually fit for the 21st century. But fortunately, we have an exceptional panel here who I believe's collective experience spans policy, regulation, academia, international corporations, payments, innovation, as well as private sector execution. I want to start by allowing each of our panelists to give their opening intervention, opening remarks. I would encourage all of our panelists to keep their opening interventions concise, please, less than 5 minutes. I won't want to have to stop you while you're speaking. I will stop you while you're speaking. Those of you that remember me will know I was very controversial as the Asian general. So I will not hesitate to cut you off, like I always did for 10 years when I was in the job. So please keep your remarks concise, straight to the point, so we can conclude this. So we can leave enough time for what I believe is the more valuable part of this session. That's a robust conversation among the panel and, of course, the audience on this topic. Starting with Professor Aaron.
Thank you. Good afternoon to each and every one of us. My assignment is to see how we can assist the weaker countries so that they can participate of the cross-border payments. Let me say that there are two cross-border payments that are emerging in Africa. One of them are participating very well at ECOWAS Commission, and that is ECOWAS Payment and Settlement System. By 2027, our head of state in ECOWAS signed that into law, that our single currency, which is what we are talking about, we actually come into effect via the payment system. But while we are doing that, everything they came up with, they are another payment system, which is for the continental payment system. And that's the Pan-African payment system. So in the end, these two payment systems is expected to fit together, in which the regional payment system is fused into the Pan-African payment system. There are quite a lot of other regional blocks, out of the 8 blocks that already have this. Now, not going to that issue, what is my assignment here? How can weaker countries be able to enjoy cross-border payment, whether it is EPSS for ECOWAS or it is for the continental payment system? There are 7 points I just want to mention within the time given to me here. Number 1, regulatory and legal technical assistance. Many of our countries today we need assistance, even including Nigeria, that when I talk that they are doing very well. No, in the area of our payment system, in line with that of ECOWAS and AFTA, there are certain obligations we need to make. The border payment system to be developed, electronic act have to come up, electronic signatures must be there, data protection have to be there, cyber security, and quite a lot. How do we get this one done? There may be need for technical assistance from World Bank, from African Development Bank, from ECOWAS Commission, from AFTA Secretariat, and all other institutions that are development partners. Secondly, the payment infrastructure at national level, we are talking of ATS and RTGS, need to be developed and operational. Luckily, that is okay for Nigeria, but for other African countries, that has to be equally done to be able to participate very well. But for the cross-border payment, there is need for support of integration into parts that Pan-African payment and settlement system, as well as the EPSA, the payment and settlement. So thirdly, there is need for digital infrastructure development, and he mentioned that. That's our moderator mentioned that one. You know, several of our member states we face a lot of digital infrastructure, and therefore the issue for national broadband expansion, for rural internet, because we want to cover everybody, we don't want to leave anybody else. And then the issue of fiber optic backbone and cloud infrastructure, public infrastructure, and many other things that we put in place. Number 4 is institutional capacity. What I mean here is that all the country, the institutions that have to participate under the cross-border, there's need to give them assistance. And I'm talking of Central Bank itself, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, and up to that right to the telecommunication, NIPC, so many other institutions, there is need to actually give each and every one of them the adequate and proper training that is necessary to participate. Custom digitalization, I don't have to mention that, you already know that, but at the touch of a button, custom to be able to do their job without too much hassle. Also, number 8 is interoperability assistance, the ability to connect all the relevant institutions in this particular platform is very important, and we are talking of the issue of upgrading the single window system to be able to make sure it interacts effectively. Not only that one, there is need to put in place even multimodal transportation system that will enhance the movement even of the product. It's part of the things that have to be done so that the payment system we are talking about will allow goods to move and payment will move. In addition, human capacity. We cannot but develop the human capacity of our national economy and our regional economy very well, because they are actually the ones that will be able to do all this kind of arrangement without much problem, including judiciary. Legislators, everyone that's involved, so that they need to know what their role are under cross-border payment, either ECOWAS payment and settlement system, or the bilateral payment and settlement system. There has to be what I call targeted financial support. You see, there's a lot of financial support that are necessary if all those institutions, all those personalities that have to operate to be able to make sure that the cross-border payment is effective. There will be some assistance. So I said from African Development Bank Infrastructure Fund, ECOWAS Regional Development Fund, After Adjustment Facility, World Bank Digital Fund Project, IMF Capacity Trust Fund, and quite a lot of others. So if we make ourselves available to all this, I think weaker economy can actually participate very well under the cross-border payment and settlement system.
Thank you very much, Prof. That's a very, very long list of when I was sitting down listening to you, I was a little bit concerned. I mean, if you list all the things that need to be, it sounded more of like a laundry list of what in particular Nigeria needs to do. But the truth is, many of the things you identified cut across most of the 54 countries. And they have to do it simultaneously. Even if Nigeria gets it all right and the other countries, they also can imagine how much work that needs to be done. But thank you very much, Prof, for your opening remarks. I'll move next to Mr. Topa for your 5 minutes or less comments, please.
Thank you very much. I got down some points which I think is very important for us to discuss. And one of the points that I got is the issue of digital infrastructure that is not even in Africa. It's very important because all the African countries are not going to that's very key. Yes. Right? Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I took from the presentation is digital infrastructure in Africa, and it's very, very important because all the countries in Africa, the central banks in Africa, are not operating on equal footing. Some countries are more developed in terms of digital penetration. It's very important that we solve that problem. If we don't solve that problem, cost of doing cross-border transactions will be extremely high. There's another point that you made, which I think is very vital, we should take away from here, and that is to say that African trade less itself. For me, that's a shame. We have all the potentials in Africa, and that brings me to the various bodies that are saddled with certain responsibilities, and all of them are needed. AFTAC is one. Afrexim Bank is also another body that will be needed in solving this equation. The African Union Committee is also one, and then the regional economic committees. All these four entities will be required in trying to solve the problems of digital penetration and economic trade in Africa. For the AFTAC, it will basically be setting the rules and coordinating and harmonizing policies, because I think it's the only body that has the approval of the 54 head of states to present one African market. And so it has the impetus to connect and coordinate all the policies within African countries. If, for example, Nigeria has a KYC requirement that is not agreeable to Kenya, Africa has to come in there and make sure that we harmonize our regulations. The Afrexim Bank will provide liquidity. It doesn't have the impetus to summon any African country, but it has liquidity, it has infrastructure. Already it owns PAPs, and it's already operating PAPs. And some of the African countries are already connected. What we just need to do is to latch on that and provide the needed trade infrastructure that we need. Many countries in Africa are already participating actively. The countries that are not participating, that is where Africa has to come in. And in a very subtle manner, mandates that everybody connects. And at the end of the day, we'll be working towards having a single currency. The African Union will then have to come in where there are internal corporations, where there are external legal issues, international corporations, with other countries like the US, China. They will come in there and provide the umbrella body. So the Afrexim Bank and the African Union Commissions are very vital if we really want to solve the infrastructure problem in Africa. If we really want to be trading among ourselves, we must demonstrate value. We must have to present value. One of the reasons why some of the African countries have resulted in not connecting to apps to do cross-border transactions is the provision of liquidity. And that is where Afrexim Bank has to again be reminded that it's going to play a very vital role in ensuring that all African countries are connected to this one infrastructure that will enable African communities to trade with itself, lower cost of transactions, and also guarantee the African sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kota. There's one question I was going to, from what you said, I think it's very important again to ask. I think you were trying to, I think I like the way you tried to break down responsibilities in terms of who needs to act. I think there's a question I'm going to come back to later, but I think I will just move to, first of all, move to Mr. Cardoso, not the one we know at Central Bank, the other Cardoso, to please give us his opening remarks. Please, 5 minutes or less. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I've told this to some of my colleagues on this panel. I'm the only one that is not Nigerian on this panel. And not being Nigerian, I'm also a Portuguese one. Let's say, coming from a former colonial power that was probably the greatest one in the 16th century. And we were in these vicinities. We more or less stopped in Elmina when we found the gold, and then go on to the south, to the Indian Ocean, passed through Mozambique, and by the way, I'm also Mozambican. I have the two nationalities. I lived there for 33 years and I continue to go there. And I lived the 10 first years of independence. So, when I speak about Africa, I'm not only an European. I also have in my cutlets, in my ribs, the smell, the sound, the feelings. And having said that, I would say that I was seeing somebody there filming, and I read in the back, Zulu films. And I thought, Zulu? And then I remind me that Zulu are a nation that descends from the Bantus. And the Bantus were originated in southeastern Nigeria and western Cameroon, and gave rise to nations like the Sena, in Zimbabwe and Mozambique, the Tsonga in Mozambique, the Xhosa and the Zulus in South Africa, and many others, the Tswanas, and Mapuas in Mozambique, which is the greatest ethnic in Mozambique, where I grew. So I said, look, well, I'm Nigerian also. I'm not, of course, not descendant, I'm white. And we Mapuas are Nigerian. So my first point is to say just not very, you Nigerian, you are not only the ancestors, the origin of the Bantus, you are also, in the northern part, the origin of the Hausas, and later on of the Sokoto Caliphate. And in the southwestern of the Yoruba kingdoms. So Nigeria is completely central to the history of this continent. And maybe when you invite Mr. Donald Trump to come to Nigeria, we can remind him that, just for him to feel, well, I could not begin without saying this. I'm sorry. I like it.
Thank you, Mr. Cardoso.
Let me begin by thanking. Let me begin by thanking the authors. I will take 4 minutes. Let me begin by thanking the authors of the background paper for this panel. I fully agree with its central message. The African Continental Free Trade is about much more than trade. It is about industrialization, infrastructure, finance, digitalization, and Africa's place in a changing international economy. Allow me, however, to approach regional integration through the lens of political economy. My argument is a simple one. In a world undergoing profound geopolitical and geoeconomic change, Africa's central challenge is to build capable and resilient states and development strategies that reflect domestic realities and respond to changing international and regional conditions. Development is the objective. Regional integration is one possible instrument. Let's remember this. Confusing the two risks expecting from regional institutions what only effective domestic governance, state's capacity and productive transformation can deliver. Historically, this distinction was less apparent. Pan-Africanism gave continental unity an extraordinary political significance. It inspired the struggle against colonialism and affirmed the dignity and sovereignty of African states. The legacy deserves recognition, but history moves. Today's priorities are state consolidation and productive transformation. Development does not begin with treaties, declarations, or institutional blueprints. It begins with capable and resilient states, effective domestic institutions, productive firms, education, infrastructure, and investment. Regional trade cannot expand in the absence of tradable goods, and no single institutional model can adequately respond to 54 different realities. African countries are also diverse in their political economies. Some continue to rely on rent-based systems of governance. Others have advanced further in institutional consolidation and productive transformation. Many continue to confront conflict, chronic insecurity, or weak state institutions. It is therefore unrealistic to expect a single development strategy or a single model of regional integration to fit all. History itself offers no universal model. Europe integrated after developing productive economies under exceptional political circumstances. Post-war reconstruction, determination to prevent another continental war, and unprecedented American political and economic engagement during the Cold War. East Asia followed a different path.
Mr. Cardoso, please, 30 more seconds, please.
Sorry?
Can you, just 30 more seconds, please, if you could round up in 30 seconds.
Oh, I can't stop.
No, you can round up in, you can round up in 30 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Cardoso. You will notice I'll get Mr. Cardoso a few more minutes after the 5 minutes. For two reasons. I think he was offering a very interesting a non-African perspective. And secondly, I'm not sure his relationship with the central bank governor. I wanted to ensure that I'll be allowed to leave the building today. So I gave him a few more minutes. But thank you, Mr. Cardoso. I think you are making a lot of very interesting points that we'll get into during the Q&A. So please just keep those thoughts. I'll get back to you. Next is Mr. Ngozi. You are most likely not related to the governor, so I will not give you more time than is allotted. So can you please, your 5 minutes, actually 5 minutes intervention, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, good afternoon, distinguished guests. I'll be speaking from the fintech perspective. You know, the truth is that Africa has never lacked ambition for integration. We have agreements, we have trade protocols and initiatives, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area. Yet, despite all these efforts, only about 16.84% of African total trade occurs within the African continent. This raises an important question. If the ambition for integration exists, what is preventing that ambition from becoming an everyday economic reality? The answer increasingly is that integration is not simply a trade problem, it's an infrastructural problem. A business can have a legal right to trade across borders, but that opportunity means very little if they cannot easily pay its suppliers, receive payments from its customers, access to reliable connectivity, navigate customs, or operate within a predictable regulatory environment. In other words, Africa does not only need agreements that connect markets, we need systems that make those connections work. Payments underpin almost every part of economic activity. They support transportation, logistics, commerce, salaries, supply chain, and small businesses. When payment systems are reliable, accessible, and secure, they make the wider economy more efficient. For us, at PAMPE, we therefore see our role as extending beyond simply enabling transactions. We are helping build the digital rails that allow individual businesses to participate more confidently in the formal economy. For us, inclusion is particularly meaningful because out of every 4 PAMPE users, 1 identified that PAMPE is their first bank account. That is more than financial access statistics. It represents what becomes possible when people who may previously have been excluded from the formal financial system gain access to reliable financial tools. And behind every transaction is the real economic activity. A small business owner paying supplier, an entrepreneur receiving money from a customer, or an individual using digital finance for the first time to make greater control of their economic future. That is why scalable fintech infrastructure supported by digital literacy, agent and merchant networks, and accessible tools has an important role to play in bringing financial services closer to underserved communities, helping small businesses move from cash into digital economy. The next frontier, however, is moving from financial inclusion to financial integration. Africa operates 54 countries, 42 currencies, and more than 30 instant payment systems. The opportunity is therefore not simply to connect more people to financial services, but to connect African market to financial services. Imagine an MSME in Lagos, sourcing product from Ghana, or maybe from Kenya, or maybe from Zimbabwe, or any other part of Africa. The real measure of regional integration is that a business can pay its suppliers, receive money, manage currency conversion, and ultimately grow, employ more people, and serve more customers across Africa without unnecessary friction. As payment system becomes more connected, so do the risk, cybersecurity, threat, fraud, data protection challenges, and digital exclusion. As access expands, protection must also expand. This is why consumer protection transaction monitoring, identity verification, and cybersecurity cannot be treated as a secondary consideration. They are foundational to future digital finance. As regulatory harmonization is particularly important, this should not mean lowering standard. Quite the opposite. We should work towards common robust standard for KYC, for consumer protections, data governance, financial security, so that consumers and businesses can enjoy the same high level of protection wherever they transact. Ultimately, regional integration should not be measured only by how easily companies can expand across borders. It should be measured by how much easier we make it for African business owners to buy, sell, receive payments, grow, create jobs, and improve lives across continents. At Pampe, we continue to strengthen Nigerian payment infrastructure so that micro, small, medium enterprises and consumers can transact with greater confidence and participate more fully in digital economy. Because Africa's next phase of integration will not be built by agreement alone. It will be built by systems that make those agreements work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ngozi. We are running a bit behind on time, so I'll go quickly to our final panelist, Ms. Folashade Femi Lawal, for her introductory remarks.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'll stand on the existing protocol. The good thing about being the last speaker is you just collate everybody's contributions and just add yours. But we are blessed to have an esteemed panel of experts. I'll just add one or two things to layer all that has been contributed today. We have all established the fact that Africa does not have a demand problem. We also don't have a payment problem because we know Central Bank is doing a great job with that. We have payment system departments and several other departments weighing in. What we need to face is the reality that we are fragmented across Africa. And we must always remember that Africa is the new frontier. Africa is the new gold. The entire world is looking at Africa and what can come out of Africa. And so we can't fail the generation coming after us by paying lip service or just talking about documentation and all of that. We've done that through the years. We have made some progress, but that's not enough. The next generation is looking for us to solve the problem. And the question we are asking ourselves, what problem are we solving? It is scale. And that scale is determined by how we can reduce the fragmentation. Today, unlike the developed countries, African payment flows is still spread across many small corridors across the world. And that gives us heavy dependency on correspondence institutions to support us with our cross-border. That needs to change because we are big enough to solve us. So the part I will come in will be, the goal is equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. What Nigeria can do is different from what Ghana can do. And so we mustn't measure results by who does the most transactions. It should be access. How many Africans across the spread have access, equal access? We should divorce ourselves from the outcome. What our focus should be is to drive that access. The next generation will ask us, what did we make of the opportunities that we have? And we also don't have infrastructure problem. Infrastructure can reduce dependency on corresponding banks, but it does not solve policy harmonization framework. And we are the ones that can solve that as well. Even as cross-border transactions grow, then we need to talk about trust. Across the room, we talked about data flows across Africa. Ultimately, what would what determines the success of all of this is the trust elements, where the participants can confidently say, I can do transactions across Africa. And the focus needs to be reducing cost. Because as long as we are going through correspondent banking, we will have increased cost, reduce liquidity. Because when the institution sending the funds max out their limits, you have to join the next queue. And it's not visible to the consumer. So we have to unite, we have to be unanimous and be deliberate and also intentional in growing from fragmentation. We just want to show that, okay, this is my country, just show the flag. We got to go beyond that. We have to ensure that larger economies may gain more volume. However, the smaller economies that we created through the fragmentation can also gain as much, as long as we create faster settlements, greater access, increased participation in regional and global trade. We cannot look for help from outside Africa. The help is from within us, and that is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Folasade Kemilawa, and also to thank all our...
We sure hope you enjoyed this video. For more entertaining video content such as behind the scenes of music videos and movies, music concerts, premieres, interviews, and exclusive gists, subscribe now to our YouTube channel Goldmynetv and be unleashed into a world of super